Good morning and welcome to another edition of Stand on Guard. My guest this morning is Gord Magill, the autonomous truckers. You read his columns, you know his Substack, and you can see that information in the description below. And when we come back, what's going on with the Coutts too, and how is governments in this country continuing? Thank you for watching this episode.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, please like the station. Hope you're all up at this early hour Sunday morning. Gord and I are always up this early, so I hope our viewers are. It's Sunday, September the 1st, historic day. Of course, in this day, 1939, the Second World War started, and God knows we're only steps away from the Third World War, the way things are going in this world. But we're going to focus on what's happening in Canada and Alberta right now. But before we do, I've got a great little clip to show you. I just saw this morning, and this is making the rounds of all the social media. In fact, it's so good, even the mainstream media is covering this. I saw this on CTV this morning. In fact, I think that's who originally got this. But this is Justin Trudeau talking to one irate steel worker. But what's nice about this is that he holds his temper. He doesn't get upset, but he just succinctly tells Trudeau, "You're finished." And I just love it.
Just one
again. Well, we got donuts over here if you want to thank you for your hard work.
I can bring some for my kids here.
Okay. The 25% tariffs we just brought in on Chinese steels can help you out.
That's going to keep my job.
Yeah.
What about the 40% taxes I'm paying, and I don't have a doctor?
The $400 million that we invested in your car means you're going to have a job.
Well, I think you're only here for another year. We won't see you around probably another year.
Well, that's what elections are for.
That's great. That's great.
And I look forward to everyone exercising the right to vote.
Yep.
And the basic choice. We're going to invest in you and your job. So
I don't believe you for a second.
Dental care? You don't want to get dental care?
Yeah, I pay for it myself.
Okay.
We're like 3 years behind.
You have a job and coverage?
Yeah, we're four people
seniors.
in my family. Every time we go for a dental visit, it's costing me about $50 in my pocket per person.
Okay.
Why? I have a good job. You're not really doing anything for us, Justin.
Well, actually, we just invested so 500,000 people that have been to the dentist got to go to the dentist over the past few months.
Probably like my neighbor that doesn't go to work because she's lazy.
You know what?
Doesn't go to work. She lives the same
Most
life
Canadians try to stick up to each other. And that's what we're going to keep doing. Good luck and take care of your family, sir.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Have a good day, sir.
Nice work, King.
Right, the other guys got the donuts. Excellent.
They got the donuts. Excellent. Let's move on. Let them eat cake.
Let them eat Tim Hortons.
Another classic moment with our beloved Prime Minister. There he is. He rarely ever encounters real working class people. He loves to pretend he's always on their side. He meets them. He just can't wait to get away. Because as soon as that guy says, "Yeah, my neighbor has got the same standard of living as me, but she doesn't want to work. She sits at home because she's lazy." Trudeau, time to go. Where's the donut? Where's the donut tray?
Oh no! A real live person went off script. We can't be having that.
I always feel sorry for these people who are forced to stand behind him when he makes these new policy announcements or has a news conference. And you see these workers standing behind him looking, "Why am I here?" Yeah. And there was one instance, it was in Ontario someplace, where this construction worker, it was a housing announcement. Construction worker actually put his hat, his construction hat over his head to cover his head because he was so ashamed of being there. And this was all caught on camera, and nobody noticed except the people watching. Trudeau never noticed. His handlers never noticed it. So the guy's got his construction hard hat. That's the word I'm looking for. His hard hat over his face, so he doesn't have to.
Well, this is the problem. They don't notice a lot of things, which is why Canada's falling apart, because they just don't notice reality around them, right?
Yeah, too true. So to get to the issue of the day here, we were supposed to have an announcement or a verdict. Well, we had a verdict. Sorry, the sentencing was supposed to come last week. I understand it's been delayed now a week for the Coutts 2, and that trial has been so underreported. There's been so many people who should have been there in Alberta that haven't been there covering that trial. You have been covering this. But I read the other day, and here's really what I want to start with, is that the Crown, the prosecution, is talking about 9 years for
They
these guys.
are.
I mean, what do you think that's even possible?
It is possible, but it seems rather unlikely given that Justice Lebrenz is restrained by precedent and previous case law. You correctly identified that sentencing has been pushed back to September 9th because Justice Lebrenz received so much extra information, right? And so when a jury trial goes down, you know, you don't ever get to know how the jury came to their decision. That's secret, and it's like secret forever. So the Crown and the defense and the judge have to argue about what the facts of the case are, and that's what the hearings were. But there was so much information brought forward, and especially after Tuesday. On Wednesday evening, there was more documents filed to Justice Lebrenz by the defense, because Tuesday, Justice Lebrenz had some sort of worrying rhetoric, but I mean, it kind of goes back and forth. And so in order to consider everything correctly, Justice Lebrenz pushed the sentencing date back to September 9th. The Crown is looking for 9 years on the mischief and possession of weapons for a dangerous purpose charges, which is pretty extreme, given that you'll remember the Mayerthorpe 4, these 4 RCMP officers who were murdered in cold blood in Mayerthorpe, Alberta, a couple of decades ago. One of those gentlemen only served 7 years. So to be accused of being in a conspiracy to murder police officers, which they were found not guilty of, the Crown is trying to get them on the lesser charges, which in no universe would ever produce a 9-year sentence. The Crown is demanding that 9-year sentence, I think, in a vindictive way, as Crown Prosecutor Johnston has been extremely vindictive all through this process, in order to, get around the fact that on the serious charge, they were found not guilty. So they're just going for maximum sentences. I mean, this is kind of expected. That's how this guy rolls.
Yeah, well, so you don't think that's even remotely possible that these guys could get 9 years? I mean, what do you think is more likely? I mean, if you were to hazard a guess on this.
If I was to hazard a guess, and a guess based on the fact that Justice Lebrenz has typically been pretty fair throughout this trial, and he's also very thorough, and he's also very knowledgeable about all the case law and precedent. I don't take, this is just my guess. I hope I'm right. I hope I'm not wrong, is that they get time served. The defense are arguing for less than time served, I believe. Maybe I have that wrong. Maybe it is time served. I think there's people who want it to be less than time served because of the precedent it's going to set for other people that are involved. You have to remember 13 people were originally arrested at Coutts, and some of those cases are still outstanding. And because those people were charged with mischief, there might be some spillover to their cases. But probably our best case scenario is time served. And given case law and precedent, it seems like it's going to be quite a stretch for the Crown to get their 9 years.
Well, let's hope so. I want to talk about the explosives, and I have this interview here. It's only just over a minute, but I think it describes a situation most people are not even aware of. A lot of people think these guys had a stockpile of explosives in their trunk, waiting to go at the border. But this interview here, I think, sums it up.
The explosive substance, it was pipe bombs initially in the disclosure in the media, even in the court. That's not the case anymore. It was a substance of an explosive nature. It was found at his residence, 200 kilometers away from Coutts. I mean, which farmyard can you drive on where there is not some explosive substance? I believe even earlier today in the court, the Crown said if you purchase, and don't quote me on this, hairspray and you don't use it, it could be considered an explosive substance. I know it is. You can throw it in the fire. I mean, deodorant cans are explosive substance. It's just a stretch. It's just it's almost craziness. It's just every farmer, everybody that's in a specialty industry, they improvise. They try to do, without blowing themselves up. But sometimes you got to build something that isn't available on the market. That doesn't mean that it's an explosive substance for a dangerous purpose. No, it wasn't in Coutts. It wasn't like it was primed and ready to go in Coutts. That's not what this was. It's what they're trying to make it out to be. So again, back to your previous question, it's malicious. They're trying to throw everything at these guys, and they're creating a theory out of thin air.
100% correct. 100% correct. Marco's dead on the money. What they're doing here, and what they've been doing since day one, and this gets back to what you said earlier about the lack of coverage, or the lack of adequate coverage on this case, is that they're trying to convict these guys in the court of public opinion, right? So the charge of having an explosive device was basically an opportunity. When the RCMP executed a search warrant on Tony Olienick's property, again, nearly 200 kilometers away from the protest site, Tony Olienick and his late father, George, both had a quarrying operation. Tony's had a bunch of different businesses throughout his life. He's a very productive member of society. He's always been self-employed. He's a very hard worker. And during trial, one of his business associates even testified to the fact that sometimes you use these sort of explosives to get drill bits out of rock, to blast rock. There's all kinds of, like, go on YouTube and type in, mine explosion, mine dynamite, and they'll show you blowing stuff up to feed it into crushers, to make aggregate, to make all kinds of different products, right? But what the Crown was doing was using this to pad their case, because what they do is they prosecute. There's a term for this, prosecutorial overcharging, where if they're trying to get somebody, they throw as many charges at them as they can, even knowing that if the case goes to court, they'll probably lose because there might not be any evidence whatsoever, or not enough of it. But they do it anyways to intimidate those who have been arrested, to intimidate witnesses, to basically say, look, like, we are the government. We have bottomless pits of money. We can fight you forever. So we're just going to charge you with this, charge you with that, charge you with as much as we can. And I believe Justice Lebrenz, even during sentencing hearings, mentioned as a mitigating factor that, these explosives were 200 kilometers away. They had nothing to do with the protest. Like, Lebrenz gets it, right? So when we see the sentencing come down on September 9th, I'm pretty sure that the explosive charge is not going to play a factor at all.
What was the RCMP up to here, though? This smells to me of a frame-up. The perception was out there, and the RCMP gave every indication at the time. I remember watching the coverage that this was somehow a direct threat to the border, these explosives. Was the RCMP deliberately mismanaging this case? I don't want to accuse them of framing these people, but it certainly looks that way. The perception is everything. And to me, the honor and repute of the RCMP is getting lower and lower every time they investigate any of these incidents, because it looks like they're deliberately, I won't say falsifying the evidence. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it looks like they're mishandling, at the very least, the evidence. What would you say to that?
I mean, mishandling of the evidence, like over and above this overcharge with the explosives thing, that really famous photo of all of the guns that they had on the table. I mean, that's mishandling of evidence, because they had to unbag everything and set it all up for this propaganda photo, which continues to haunt this case. Like, every time you get in a discussion with anyone, anytime you see the mainstream media, they always print that photo, because they have to, what they're trying to do is the propaganda operation. They want you to believe that these guys were, like, ready to go to war with the cops, and they show you that propaganda photo, and then they repeat the allegations from undercover officers ad nauseum, which we all have to remember, and I want people to understand this. Every single allegation from the undercover officers is not based on anything. They never had recordings whatsoever. Hastily drawn down notes at the end. But as you say, given orders that may have come from Ottawa, they were looking for anything to shut down the Freedom Convoy. They were considering using the Emergencies Act from the word go. I mean, Trudeau admitted that at POEC, that they were considering it very early. So was there communications between, Curtis Zablocki, Brenda Lucki, and the RCMP at Coutts? Was this a setup? Were these guys walking into a trap? It would be good to find out. Blacklock's reporter showed in a report that there's like 17,000 classified or top secret documents related to the Freedom Convoy that we still haven't seen. How many of those documents indicate communication between RCMP in Ottawa and RCMP in Coutts? Like, we don't know, right? 700 of them are considered top secret. Why are there top secret documents for a peaceful protest? Like, what are they trying to hide, right? So these are questions we have to ask ourselves as we're watching this case proceed because of all of these other factors, right?
Yeah, and of course, the last time we talked, we mentioned how access to information, I think it was the Freedom of Information Act in the States, revealed how the Biden administration and the Trudeau administration were colluding with the Department of Homeland Security, actively censoring the accounts of Freedom Convoy organizers, participants. So it's not beyond belief that there's further collusion here, that further revelations from any access requests that are actually affirmed or completed, we might discover more information. I doubt, though, we're going to get more on this because this whole matter to me has been a cover-up from day one. If you recall, it was the accusations that there was somehow some sinister militia work going on here, and these accusations of Diagolon being behind all this, which of course, and it's nothing more than a web chat society. They don't have an organized militia.
Yeah, and
anywhere.
for all the noise they made about Diagolon was a dead letter in trial. They were only mentioned, I think, once or twice, and it was only because of the photo on that patch of the vest that was seen. But as far as the prosecution goes and the way the trial went, no mention of them whatsoever other than that patch. It became a total non-entity. The Crown tried to bring in this woman named Barbara Perry as a sort of expert witness to testify to the supposed right-wing extremism of the Coutts Four guys. The Crown actually withdrew their application to have her on because they realized she was a crazy person. So it wasn't going to help their case. So that all of that stuff is garbage. Interestingly, again, I'm going to go back to something you said at the beginning about the media coverage on this. I've written several emails to the CBC, and they actually answered me. I was so surprised. I complained about there's a sort of CBC radio show and podcast called Front Burner, where they had on, finally, after 2.5 years of this case going forward, they invited on a gentleman who writes for the Canadian Press named Bill Graveland. Mr. Graveland repeats the government side of the issue at all times. He never provides countervailing evidence. He never talks to the people on the advocate side, doesn't talk to the defense, doesn't talk to anything, and he just repeats the government line on this. CBC had him on. He did his thing, did his job to smear the men. So I, myself and another associate, wrote letters to the CBC about it, and they actually answered me, and then it was directly from the CBC's ombudsman, and then he looped me in to an email with a guy named Brody Fenlon, who's the big cheese, big kahuna news editor guy for the entire CBC. And then a couple of weeks later, I get another email from the head of the director of journalism for CBC Calgary, where she tried to dissemble on the coverage and said, we believe it's fair and we believe we've been impartial by not covering this case, right? Like they did the Front Burner thing. They've had a few articles on their website, but in 2.5 years, they never talked to anybody on the defense side. They never talked to the families of the men, never talked to their advocates, never talked to their communities. It's just all been the government side. And the CBC, this woman at CBC Calgary, literally tried to say that this was fair and impartial. 2.5 years of not talking to the other side of the story is fair and impartial to the CBC? Like, let's defund these bastards.
Well, I think that's something everybody watching this show right now, anyway, would agree with. And I've been fighting for the defunding the CBC long before it became a good talking point for the pure poly of conservatives. And it's amazing to me how they continue to take $1.3 billion a year from taxpayers and give so little back in terms of news coverage. And do I think they could survive by themselves? Yeah, probably. But the way our media is subsidized now, the whole mainstream media is subsidized by Trudeau. This whole thing is a sham. It has to stop. There has to be objective media out there. But I don't know if the mainstream media is going to survive the next
Well,
stage.
I would say let the people who listen to the CBC and think they're actually an impartial arbiter of reality pay for it, which is to say rich people in Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa, right? If you're a government employee with a 6-figure salary and you believe you need the CBC, cool. Pony up your own money and subscribe to it, and don't make the rest of us pay because we know they're a propaganda outfit, right?
Yeah, it's sort of a microcosm of the Trudeau government, because here you have a crown corporation that actually gives its executives, it gives all of the grand poobahs in the organization bonuses while it's firing working people from the organization. And it just amazes me how they can look themselves in the mirror every morning and do this, because these people are getting horrendously huge salaries at the top for censoring the news, for telling us what we should believe. And at the same time, they're laying off people because they just can't afford it. They just can't afford to keep going. And not for a minute do they say, well, maybe we should stop giving ourselves these huge bonuses if we're serious about this. Even the optics are bad, but that doesn't matter. It's not just the optics, it's the mechanics, the logistics of it. This is an organization that can't afford to give bonuses to people, but they can keep doing it because they know the Trudeau government will keep flushing money their way. And when I see the coverage they do, and to me, what happened in Coutts is a perfect example of that. How their coverage is inadequate, to say the least. It's not completely distorted.
Right.
And
And I want to make a point here just so that I don't want people to think we're just beating on the CBC. The rest of the media's coverage has been terrible. I mentioned this Bill Graveline guy. His articles like go out on the wire and get republished by the Globe and Mail or CTV. The National Post had a guest contribution on the Coutts story last week, littered with errors. Half the article was, again, repeating allegations from the undercover officers verbatim as if they were the truth, not telling their readers that none of this stuff was recorded, not even like indicating the basic truth that, hey, these guys got ruled not guilty, which means the jury saw through what the undercovers was saying and rendered it basically irrelevant, right? Why is a center-right publication like the National Post not asking itself deeper questions about what's gone on with this case? Why is the Toronto Sun not asking deeper questions, right? Like this whole Coutts thing, it seems like it's radioactive even to supposedly private media. Now, remember, most of these guys are on the take with subsidies from Trudeau, so they're basically government media as well. But like, I've written to all of these papers and all of these websites. I've offered to go on podcasts on the left, like Canada Land, one of the biggest leftist podcasts in Canada. I sent all of their people an email saying, how come you guys aren't talking about this? Would you like to? I can hook you up with the advocates out in Alberta. Here's all this stuff that like various people have written. No answer. Like these people just do not want to hear the other side of the story. It's just been shut down by everybody. It's like a total code of silence other than people like yourself.
Yeah, and one of the things that a lot of people have totally disregarded, and I never see it mentioned in the mainstream media, is that one of the reasons, the rationale that Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act was he had to stop this crisis at the border. And of course, this so-called crisis at the border was resolved before
That's
he
right.
invoked the Emergencies Act, not just in Alberta, but in Ontario.
Yep.
So there is no rationale except to come down heavy and hard on the peaceful protest in Ottawa. And it all comes down to that. And the Trudeau government continues to pretend that they did the right thing. But before we leave, and thank you for keeping us updated on what's happening with the Coutts too, because I say again, has been underreported, not just by the mainstream media and not just by CBC, but by conservative media who haven't been there, and I take them to task for that. If I
Right.
was an
So
Alberta,
let me give you an indication of the media who showed up in Lethbridge this week. Rebel News, Sheila Gunn-Reid is there, and this Bill Graveland guy. That's it. They were the only two.
No.
I think at one point there was someone else there. I can't remember who, but for the most part, it's been the only mainstream media has been Rebel News and this Canadian press guy who's done nothing but smear the men and peddle disinformation.
That's incredible, but confirms my suspicions as to who's been there. Just shifting quickly to what happened recently here in Ottawa with the Freedom Convoy trial of Chris Barber and Tamara Leach. I have been covering that. I've been at 95% of the court dates when they've been here, and they keep yanking these poor people from Saskatchewan and Alberta to Ottawa for 3 or 4 days at a time. The last time they were here, they had to spend 2 bloody weeks in town at their own expense, of course, to wait so they could get their defense final summation. Then they were told the prosecution had one more kick at the can. The Crown was going to have another summation, and this whole thing to me is just mind-boggling. This will be the third prosecution summation now. But at least they can do that via Zoom. They don't have to come back to Ottawa. But this has been lawfare wars waged against these two, and I've talked to both of them, and they were so relieved to find out no, they didn't have to drive back to Ottawa this month for yet another day in court. But what amazes me about this, Gord, is that they're not going to get a verdict on this mischief charge. And let's remember, no explosives involved here, no guns. This is a mischief charge, like what happens at a bad wedding reception. They're not going to get a verdict on this till at the earliest January, February 2025, perhaps spring. I mean, this will be almost literally 2.5 years to get a verdict in a mischief trial.
Right.
And
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a judge, but it seems to me that Justice Heather Perkins McVeigh could quash this, right? Like if she wanted to, I believe, I could be wrong, that she could just say this is ridiculous and put her foot down. And I mean, she's got plenty of good reason to because the Crown has no case. She realizes how ridiculous this is. She's been extremely frustrated in court. I believe you've seen that. Everyone who's been there has reported on that. The problem is, if Justice McVeigh or if Justice Lebrenz were to, accurately and truthfully, put their foot down on the malicious prosecution going on with both these cases, their careers are over, right? 77% of the judiciary in Canada are donors to members of or appointees by the Liberal Party of Canada. It's a club, and it's maintained and run by the Laurentian elite, of whom the Liberal Party is their political arm. And if they do the right thing, they're gone. Their careers are over, because that's just the way it is in Canada right now. So it sucks that we have to wait this long. It's really terrible that the Coutts guys spent 2.5 years in jail. The media have done nothing to ask any questions about that. Tony Olienick and Jerry Moran both spent around 90 days apiece in solitary confinement, which is a recognized form of torture. Why is it that we have Gitmo North in Canada, and why is it nobody's asking any questions about that, right? Like Canadians and Canadian society always pride ourselves, and we have for decades, we're not like the Americans. We're all about peacekeeping. We're all about like a fair and liberal society. And when we have Gitmo North, nobody wants to turn around and figure out where the smell is coming from.
no, that is so true. That is so true. And this is only going to get worse as we get closer to Trudeau's Online Harms Act with free speech. We see what's happening in the UK right now. It's just shocking to
Yeah.
me that what the world's oldest democracy, and that's what Britain is, going back to the Magna Carta, it took centuries of activism, of fighting the government, of fighting the crown in Great Britain to reach a stable democracy. And this clown Keir Starmer, I call him Herr Keir Starmer, by the way. I don't call him Sir. I don't know who the hell had the bright idea of knighting this incompetent ass, but he's Keir Starmer for obvious reasons. He reminds me of another Herr from Germany. But this guy is clamping down on free speech to the point where people are getting 3 years in jail for opposing the government. And this, to me, is very ominous because this is going to happen in Canada
That's
if we
right.
allow Trudeau. And
if Bill C-63 passes, Canada will be in even deeper shit than it already is. And one of my contentions here, and again, I could be wrong, I think what's happening with the Coutts guys and possibly even Chris Barber and Tamara Lich is the government is looking for cases for precedent for when 63 passes, because it's going to be brand new legislation. If it passes, there's no case law for it, right? But you have to understand certain parts of Bill C-63 relate to thought crime, right? Like there's components of C-63 which allow the government to use your social media posting and your communication against you to argue that you might need an ankle bracelet to be monitored. You might even need to go to jail and be put in custody because they believe you're going to commit a crime, right? That's like thought crime. This is like Minority Report level stuff. But because this piece of legislation is going to be brand new, no precedent. If you look at the prosecution of Tony Olienick and Chris Carbert, the vast bulk of it is based on the allegations from the undercover officers and from text messages and group chats and phone calls. So they're building the case around Tony Olienick's words, mostly, because there's less from Chris Carbert. And that's what they're building it on, right? What does Tony Olienick think? What is Tony Olienick saying? They're trying to bust Tony Olienick based on what's in his head. Chris Barber and Tamara Lich, same thing. They were trying to get them on their social media posts. The government is trying to come for your right to express yourself and for what's in your head. They don't believe that you should have your own independent thoughts. They don't believe you should be allowed to express yourself. Look what's going on out in BC here this week, right? The BC Conservatives an election coming up, and the NDP in BC are freaking out because they found out like 4 of the candidates in this other party donated to the Freedom Convoy. And they're all like, oh, we can't have this. They do not believe in your right to express yourself or to take part in movements or protests that they don't think are necessary, right? These people are tyrants. If C-63 passes, we're going to get Keir Starmer on steroids in Canada.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why we're fighting this bill as much as possible. If this thing passes second reading in the fall, it's ominous. It could pass before the next election, if we have a next election. I keep saying I don't put it past Trudeau to declare an emergency or a crisis to postpone that next election, perhaps indefinitely, because these people are all working in concert. This is confirmed to me. What's happening in the UK, what happened in France with the arrest of the CEO of Telegram, confirms to me that these people are working in concert. There's a higher agenda going on here. There's a globalist agenda. They're all reading from the same talking points. Kamala Harris is the same way. She's reading from Justin Trudeau's housing plan, for God's sake. She's reading from the same talking points that the Liberal Party of Canada produces, as the UK Labour Party produces, as Emmanuel Macron is saying in France. These people all have the same script. And it's frightening because you know where that script is coming from. It's coming from the WEF and other globalist organizations.
All right. Well, let us remember that the original sort of communist movement and socialist movement, it was called Comintern, Communist International, right? Yes. What do we have now? It's international in scope. They don't believe in nation sovereignty. They don't believe in your right to express yourself. Like, we got some ominous parallels here that people should be investigating as they see what their governments are doing to them.
Oh, that's a very good point. Communist International, and now we have Globalists International, and we have people who are all doing the same thing. And people wonder, well, I wonder why free speech is being attacked in the traditional democracies, UK, Canada, Australia, United States, all at the same time. It's like there's something behind this. Yeah, there is, obviously. You really have to have your head in the sand not to notice that these people are being orchestrated. And But I tell you, Gord, thank you for keeping on top of this story, because I know there's a lot of Canadians who just want to ignore it, want to pretend this just didn't happen, that the police didn't act this way, that we can keep trusting everybody. Trust your government, trust your police force. I don't anyway. I haven't for for quite some time, but as a former military guy, I always did trust the RCMP. I always saw them as almost brothers in arms, comrades in arms. We were fighting the same good fight for Canada. I don't see that anymore. I see them being in the pocket of Justin Trudeau or whomever is paying the salary, and I think that's ominous for Canada. I think that's very, very, very bad, because I don't think we have equal justice. And this trial in Coutts has proven that to me. So my hope and my prayers are with these guys this week. I would like them to see them get out. I'd like to see them at least get time served, and perhaps more. But if the scales of justice are so askew in this country that 9 years is even a possibility, then I hope there is massive protest, and at least a massive realization amongst Canadians that there's something wrong with our justice system, that it's become persecutional, it's become adversarial, it has become so politicized, it's no longer in our control. And I think that's dangerous. You've been on top of the story from day one, and my praise goes out to Rebel News for being there as well. Everybody in Alberta should be there watching this next week, because no matter how this goes, this is an historic decision for all Canadians. And that's what I say about Chris Barber and Tamara Leach every time I see them in Ottawa. I say, you fought for us for COVID, against COVID mandates, for basic personal freedom. I'm fighting for you today. I'm fighting for you because you put your reputation on the line. You spent time in jail, Tamara. You guys had your bank accounts frozen. You guys have been through hell and back with this trial, gone back and forth, back and forth. It never seems to end. So I'm standing with you today. This is why I cover these stories as I do, because to me, this is about basic freedom, individual freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. And without those things, we have no democracy. And so people say, well, aren't you getting a little bit too subjective in this? I say no, because in the Second World War, it was clear there was an enemy to world peace, to world sanctity, to sanity. And that enemy was the Axis powers. And we were standing firm against that. And journalists understood that. Journalists don't understand today. This is a war on the mind. This is a war against free speech. And we cannot do anything less than fight this war. And if we have to stand up and say these people have been unjustly persecuted, and that's why I continue to do that. So thank you, Gord, for the work you're doing on this. Once again, your autonomous truckers, your Substack is in the description, and the work you're doing, the writing you're doing, is appreciated, because believe me, we need more of it. And I thank you for your contributions to this, because that is so incredibly necessary right now.
Thanks for having me on, David. I appreciate your kind words. As you said, these people went to the wall for us. They stood up and said no more. They organized. They went to Ottawa. They went to Coutts, Windsor, the border between Manitoba and North Dakota. Put their bodies, their trucks, their businesses, and everything on the line to say that enough is enough. And the least I could do is to speak about it and let people know what's going on. And help fill the gap. There's a number of people out there also writing about this and paying attention to it. And the more the merrier, I say. And yeah, please keep your eyes on it. September 9th, we should be getting a final ruling on sentencing from Justice Lebrenz for the boys out in Coutts.
Great. We will be keeping our eyes open, and we'll have you on again soon, Gord. Our guest today has been Gord Magill, Autonomous Truckers. Read his Substack, read the work he's doing. This guy has been out there in the front lines fighting, not just for the Coutts too and all the other people involved, but for Canadian freedom. And join us again soon. We'll be back on the air tomorrow, same time, same place, giving you all the news that you need to know. I'm David Crayden, and thank you, Gord, for being here again.
No problem, sir. Thank you.